For most people today, the word exercise replaces daily physical movement we evolved to do. We assume it's natural, a normal thing people do in gyms and parks. Exercise is a habit, a routine to follow 1 hour a day, 4 times a week. But the idea that movement should be separated from daily life and packaged as a repeatable, measurable practice is historically recent. The very word exercise comes to us through Latin and Old French, exercere, which means to keep busy or to train. The word carried a range of meanings: to use, to keep engaged, even to drive out. It moved from a broad sense of activity into a narrower, modern sense, deliberate bodily training aimed at specific ends. That semantic narrowing is important. It signals a cultural shift. Movement was being turned into an object, a thing you can schedule, sell, and standardize. If we want to understand how the fitness industry was born, we need to follow 3 parallel changes that happened across the 19th and early 20th centuries. First, the social transformation. Industrialization and urbanization broke the old rhythms of work and movement. We moved from rural environments to the cities, and it marked a global shift in the way we engaged the body daily. Second, the intellectual and pedagogical response. Educators and nationalists systemized movement into manuals, clubs, and public programs. It might have had a good intention initially, but as anything that needs to be standardized, it created a way of seeing physical practice in relationship to the human body as that of a conveyor belt to a product produced in a factory. The third was the commercialization and spectacle. Entertainers, entrepreneurs, and advertisers turned bodily training into a marketable product. It needed to be something easily understood by the masses. Those 3 currents converged and produced something unseen before, a public body that exercised for its own sake. Let's look at the social context. Before industrialization, most people's movement was integral to survival. You could not sustain yourself without plowing fields, hauling fuel, carrying water, and building your own house. The body's work was woven into everyday life. Machines changed that. Factories imposed repetitive, constrained tasks and standardized rhythms. The body was reconfigured by the clock and the machine. Time was sliced into shifts of extreme activity and complete collapse. Bodies were meant to be efficient rather than versatile, and whole populations shifted into sedentary urban routines. That disruption created a problem and a fertile soil for a new market to emerge. As people stopped moving in varied functional ways, their bodies started to deteriorate, and the health started to decline rapidly across the industrialized nations. New anxieties about vigor, health, and national strength emerged. Physical decline became a social question as much as a personal one. One of the earliest and most direct responses was the Turnverein movement in Germany. In the early 1800s, gymnastics educator and nationalist Friedrich Ludwig Jahn founded a gymnastics club called the Turnverein. Athletics was the least of its concerns. He wanted to produce better citizens. Jahn installed parallel bars, pommel horses, and rings. He invented both apparatus and the pedagogy. He was advocating for a strong, disciplined body for a strong nation. His aims were rather political than physical, because he saw physical training as a crucial part of developing a better society. The Turnverein spread across German-speaking lands and later inspired national gymnastics movement elsewhere. These clubs became the precursors to what we know as commercial gyms today. At the time, however, they were civic formations that served to institutionalize motion. Running parallel to nationalist gymnastics were the first commercial enterprises that already resembled a modern gym back then. The credit for the first public commercial gym is often given to a French strongman and gymnast, Hippolyte Triat, who opened clubs in Brussels and Paris in the mid-19th century. He combined instruction with showmanship, offering classes, training, and public demonstrations. He was less concerned with the social aspect of the physical training that were at the forefront of the culture at the time. Triat's clubs were a direct bridge between traditional physical training and the market for paid instruction and spectacle. This model showed great commercial success and later was repeated across Europe and North America. By the late 19th century, physical culture had become a full-blown social movement. The term physical culture came to describe a constellation of practices like gymnastics, calisthenics, weightlifting, and also including the hygienic reform, a movement that emphasized the importance of the environment on health, which included such things as we take for granted now, like access to clean water and building sewage systems in the cities. All these practices were advocated by public figures in Europe and the United States. Into the scene stepped a man who, more than anyone else at the time, turned bodily training into a branded business, Eugen Sandow. Sandow was a Prussian-born strongman who made his name on the music hall and vaudeville circuits. He opened the idea of muscle display as both spectacle and science. In 1897, he opened the Institute of Physical Culture in London, a permanent place where ordinary people could pay to train using methods Sandow promoted, read his periodicals, and buy exercise devices. Sandow published manuals, organized physique contests, and marketed training devices and diets. He helped turn a public fascination with strength into a consumer industry. Two features of this late Victorian moment are worth pausing on. First, the new gyms were public and commercial. You could buy instruction and membership rather than inherit it through guilds or social status. Second, physical training was being married to scientific rhetoric. Sandow and others spoke of exercise in terms borrowed from physiology, hygiene, and the new emergent sciences of the body. That language made training seem rational and modern. This reframing made it easier to sell it as a medicine for urban life. The early 20th century accelerated the process. In the United States, Bernarr Macfadden built a media empire around physical culture. He published magazines dedicated to it, opened specialized clinics, and organized public spectacles promoting the body as a moral and social project. The figure of the ideal body was sold by magazines, conventions, and mail-order courses. Side by side ran the spectacle of the circus and vaudeville strongman, with more institutional forms like the YMCA, which provided community centers offering gym classes and structured physical education. Rising mass press, emerging taste for the advertising, and the growth of leisure time after industrial reforms turned physical culture from an elite pastime into a mass market for a layman. So what did people actually do in those early fitness spaces? The programs were eclectic. Some clubs were following the gymnastics model and were filled with apparatus like pull-ups and parallel bars. Others emphasized calisthenics and exercises you could perform anywhere, such as push-ups, squats, or marching drills. Strongmen and bodybuilders promoted progressive resistance training by lifting heavy weights and progressively increasing load. And then practice soon migrated into city gyms as well. Training manuals, including exercise techniques, instructions about posture, breathing, diet, and hygiene. The act of exercising was being systematized. The notion of sets, repetitions, prescribed rest, and program progression was being developed for the first time. That systematization is fundamental because it turned movement into a protocol you could replicate and sell. The story, however, is not only mechanical. There was a language and an aesthetics at work. Sandow's physique contests, public weigh-ins, and photograph introduced a new way of seeing the body. It became an object to be sculptured, measured, and displayed for public eye. Pre-industrial bodies were judged for their function. Did you have enough strength to plow or stamina enough to harvest? The new physical culture judged bodies solely for their form, divorced from any functionality. This shift altered desires. To look fit became to look virtuous, morally upright, and modern. This new market logic created innovations in equipment, venue design, and pedagogy. The culture was changing with the speed of light. Early devices such as spring-grip dumbbells, rubber-resistant bands, simple pulling machines have attempted to replicate the overload principles of heavy lifting in compact forms suitable for small urban studios. The very first fully commercial gym that we would recognize by the modern standards was opened in 1939 by Jack LaLanne in Oakland, California. The layout of these pioneer health clubs was itself a sales strategy. Open floors for classes, apparatus along the sides, mirrors for self-surveillance, and the counter selling dietary supplements and manuals. LaLanne invented many of the fitness machines we see in the commercial gyms today. He designed the first leg extension machine, pulley machines that use cables, weight selectors, and many others. The newly emergent gym culture offered a package of identity. Membership implied belonging to a modern class, a new civic virtue. By the interwar period, the industry have diversified. Mail-order fitness courses like the Charles Atlas 97-pound weekly campaigns democratized the promise. You could become physically strong without joining a club by following illustrated lessons and using minimal equipment. Meanwhile, post-war America saw the rise of chain and suburban gyms. Figures such as Vic Tanny in the 1940s pioneered the health club model aimed at middle-class family, offering convenience, ambience, and marketed wellness rather than only aesthetic training. He introduced yearly memberships with reduced prices and other budget plans to attract working-class families to his facilities. These changes moved fitness from an urban spectacle and niche culture into everyday consumption. There is a political architecture to the story too. Governments and institutions adopted these practices for ideological purposes. They introduced national physical tests for school children, paramilitary drills, and workplace programs that promised to make citizens fit for labor or military service. The idea that bodies could be improved en masse fit neatly into modern projects of state building, public health, and military preparedness. As the factories created products where each item was undistinguishable from the other, the political angle of the physical education was a conveyor belt for the movement and the body of the citizens. In that sense, the fitness industry as we know it today did not emerge in a vacuum. It rode institutional interest in population health and national strength. Perhaps the most important change was conceptual. The old categories of work and play had blended into a new category, exercise. Work used to be training in itself. Physical movement was an intrinsic part of life. Industrialization divorced the two. Exercise, in the modern sense, solved a cultural problem by creating an activity that stood outside both labor and leisure. A scheduled, measurable regimen aimed at improving a body that otherwise had little opportunity to practice varied functional movement. The very notion of exercise made movement a commodity. As the system matured, the fitness industry learned how to sell not just methods but identities. The gym became a modern temple where rituals of entry, membership, and display replaced older rituals of initiation and occupation. Mirrors, machine, and trainers mediated a new relationship to the body. Now it became a project to work on. That logic set the stage for the boom decades later, the boutique studios, the franchised health clubs, the era of televised workouts, and later the quantified fitness platforms we see today. There are ironies and consequences. The systematization that made exercise efficient and scalable also narrowed what movement meant. Where pre-industrial life demanded multi-planar, varied skills, problem-solving, agility, and extreme endurance, the modern fitness reduces motion to isolated, repeatable gestures. That reduction can be effective for some goals, but it also encourages a particular distorted aesthetic and delimited functionality. The fitness industry turned the body into a set of measurable outputs and thereby shaped how people perceive their embodiment. The series of metrics matter more than an integrated field of action. If we take the long view, then, the birth of the fitness industry is a story about how modern life reorganized movement. Industrial clocks and urban routines created a new problem. Educators and nationalists invented standardized systems to respond to it. Entertainers and entrepreneurs commercialized those systems and turned them into a culture. The word exercise marks that historical turn. It's nothing more than a modern category for a formerly embedded human practice. For the next chapter of this project, we'll trace the consequences of that commercialization, how venues, machines, data, and design shaped what counts as a fit body, how boutique studios repackage ritual as an experience, and how modern devices quantify life into a set of parameters. But for now, the key point is this: exercise as we know it is an invention. It built on older practices such as gymnastics, martial training, labor conditioning, but the fitness industry made those practices into a marketable, repeatable, and deeply influential social technology. Understanding that origin helps us see why movement today feels imposed. For a modern human, it is not an integrative part of life anymore. It is a private project and a public product.